Good morning, Russell Coutts. Can you hear me? You are in New.
Yes, I can hear you perfectly, Mikkel. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well. It's evening in Oslo and it's morning in New Zealand. Good morning.
Good morning.
We're very happy to have you as our guest this week. Obviously, we're going to talk about SailGP, but I think it's proper to say congratulations with your son who won the Moth World Championship. That's a great thing.
Oh, yes, I was very proud of him, actually. His first big, big win in a world championship. Uh, he's already achieved something that I never achieved. I never won a single-handed senior world championship. I won a single-handed junior world championship, and of course I won the Finns at the Olympics, but not. I didn't win a world championship in a single-handed boat. So he's already beat me there.
Right. Well, I think it's fair to say that your career so far has been quite different. I mean, you won the America's Cup 5 times, and the question now is, where does he go?
Where does he go?
Yeah.
Oh, wherever he wants to. I mean,
Mm.
he's going to, I think, try out for the 49er. Um, there's very stiff competition in the 49er class in New Zealand. So even just to qualify is a big for the Olympics is a big task.
Mm.
But he's enjoying his sailing. He's having fun. Um, it's great as a parent to see one of at least one of our kids has taken heavily to the sport and really loves competing and loves racing at the top level.
Mm. Mm. I also saw the great grandson of Buddy Melgis in this World Championship. There are some people of great pedigree there.
Yeah, Harry Melgus Jr. I think that's what his. I think they say his junior was there. Obviously a very talented young sailor from the US. It's
Mm.
actually great to see the US now having some emerging talent coming through. I remember when way back in 1984, the US was dominant in sailing. And they lost that dominance over the years. We all used to have to go to train in the US because all the best sailors were over there, or a lot of the best sailors were over there. So times changed, and it's good to see that they're now seem to be building back to to prominence in the world of sailing again. Because I actually think we need a strong US contingent to move the sport forward.
Mm. But now, for the last decade or so, the best sailors have come from New Zealand, and that's perhaps partly thanks to you.
Well, I mean, we've had some good sailors from New Zealand for sure, and Australia in particular has produced a lot of really good sailors of late. So yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the main reasons sailing has done well in New Zealand is uh, because of the publicity it's had. In other words, the marketing around the sport.
Mm.
When you even go back to Peter Blake's days, that was national news. People knew what was going on in the then around the world races that Peter Blake was competing in and winning in. And then of course there was the various America's Cup campaigns, and now recently we had a massive crowd at the SailGP event in Auckland.
Right.
Um, I think that's I'd say 90% of the reason young kids get into sailing in this country is because it's visible. It's pretty hard to build a sport when it's invisible and you don't really have any marketing or prominence around the sport. And in a way, when you look at what's happened in the US, of course, with the change in to social media and news sources. Of course, all the traditional magazines that we all used to read 30 and 40 years ago, they've all disappeared. And they used to market the the current generation of sailors as it was then, um, and sort of showcase the sport in a way that I think got a lot of young sailors that were just getting into it really excited about it and gave them something to aim for. Whereas if you really have nothing going on, it's pretty hard to grow the sport, I think.
Mm, mm. Well, we envy you because we have an equally long coastline, but in Norway, everyone talks about cross-country skiing. So that's where our money goes and where our interest is mainly, and soccer, of course. But sailing is sort of a bit in the back of people's mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because Norway's got a pretty solid record in Olympic Games as a sport of sailing, you know.
Absolutely.
And it's good to see there's been some foiling initiatives that have happened there of late. You know, I noticed that they had hosted the WASP Games recently,
Mm,
which was, you know, fantastic to see. So
mm,
yeah, I mean, there's no reason why, you know, I think there's no reason today why the sport can't become more popular now. We've got some really cool platforms that young people look at and seem to get excited about. If you look at the recent transformations to wing foiling,
mm,
that's relatively cheap, relatively sort of easy to the equipment's easy to store and handle and transport. And lo and behold, you know, the sport's really taken off, especially, you know, in this part of the world.
mm.
So, you know, I think there's lots to be excited about for the future. I think a lot of young kids are getting excited about the sport now and you know really getting into it, which is what we all want.
Absolutely. And wing foiling is catching on here as well. But we're going to talk about SailGP, which has been a huge success. You're now into the fifth season, and it's fair to say that it's grown tremendously. More than you had expected, or do you still have some way to go?
Faster than we expected, that's for sure. I mean, it's in a way we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, I am surprised by the speed of the growth, but we shouldn't be surprised because in a way our sports lacked a platform like this that you can sign long-term agreements with partners. You know, Rolex just, as we saw, signed a 10-year agreement, renewed a 10-year agreement
Mm,
um, with SailGP. All of our partners are long-term contracts with pre-agreed options to extend the term, um, which, you know, judging by the satisfaction of those partners at this stage, they almost certainly will renew.
mm,
So that's great when you can plan 10 years out or more, then you can start to really say, well, this is what we're going to do in the future, and this is the teams we've got. They might have different owners, they might have different sponsors, they might even be from a different country, but that team will still exist in the future. When you can do that, then you can really build something. And I think the other thing that's happened is we've finally had let's say a broadcast friendly property. We've come up with, I think, a formula that seems to be generating audience. And what I mean by that is if you look at our audience stats, and we're now averaging around 20 million dedicated viewership per year. Now, dedicated viewership's live or near live, so that's your real viewership. Your secondary viewership of news and, you know, sort of short form reporting. That's of course much larger. But your real engaged audience is the dedicated audience,
mm,
and that's more than twice I ever saw in any other form of the sport before now, you know, and it's on a regular basis.
mm,
So, and the fact is, you know, when we do our audience surveys, that's probably, you know, I mean, less than 15% are avid sailing followers or avid sailors.
mm, mm,
Sorry, not followers, avid sailors.
mm,
I think by far the bigger proportion of fans are racing people. people that are just interested in racing and watching this as a sport, and then the general sports fans. So I reckon that bodes really well for the sport. I think it's bringing more interest around the sport to people that wouldn't have otherwise considered it. And we're seeing commercial partners now come in. We're seeing growth across pretty much every facet of what we're doing. And that bodes well for the future. And I think it'll bring more youth into the sport as well, because they are starting to watch this on a regular basis. Our audience demographic is younger than what some of the more traditional forms of the sport are. So, and that's a good thing. That's going to hopefully bring more young sailors into yacht clubs and into sailing programs, and more numbers is a good thing.
Absolutely, I think you're right. But it was a bold initiative when you started it together with Larry Ellison, and without his money, it wouldn't have started. So it did take one very wealthy individual who believed in the idea, and with you who came from America's Cup to pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, we did learn some stuff about running events, prior to starting SailGP, and we started to learn what was working and what wasn't. But I don't think we had this platform as well. The platform. By that I mean the high speed racing where you've got movement on screen, where you've got events happening on a really regular basis on screen, and the graphical overlays make it understandable to the general fan. There were other attempts at trying to do an early version of SailGP prior to us that didn't work, and I think a lot of it was because that didn't have the same platform as what we've got today. In essence, it was a totally different product, and that combination of, I think, the movement on screen, the jeopardy of the racing. Our races are close. Basically, you get lots of passing, lots of events on the racetrack, relatively short form. So and we took that lesson from the NBA when they years ago when they divided the game into 4 quarters, and the younger demographic mainly focusing on the fourth quarter. The fact of the matter is people are viewing short form content more these days. So it's natural that if you have 15-minute races, you're probably going to get more viewership than if you have, hour and a half races.
Mm.
So that's, I think a combination of those things has really, sort of come together and is definitely working to build the property.
Mm. But I believe that the timing was pretty good also, because you were just through some America's Cup campaigns. Larry Ellison had been very successful in the America's Cup. You were looking for alternatives, looking for something that would be more, how should I say, sustainable than the America's Cup. And
Well, yes, it's certainly sustainable in a business sense. Well, and of course, we've got a big focus on the environmental sustainability as well. But in a business sense, sustainable in our terms means that as I said earlier, if a owner changes, if an owner sells the team, or if your top athletes change, or if your top sponsors change, the team still exists as it does in other sports. And that's really what's been missing. When you look at some of the great brands that existed in sailing years ago, a brand like Stars and Stripes, where some of us that are old enough to remember Dennis Conner and his team, fabulous brand, right? And at the end of it, when Dennis retired, the brand stopped. It disappeared, and in a way, that was an example of what was wrong with the sport. You spend all that money developing the brand and the boat and the team, and at that stage, it had a following, and then that all just disappeared. Another owner didn't come and buy that brand and then continue it on. No, it just disappeared. So it really, that's how we structured SailGP, and that's why, I mean, who would have thought in sailing that you'd be selling teams for $50 million? a team that didn't even exist, a new franchise for $50 million. Who would have thought that that would have existed in sailing 5 years ago? I certainly wouldn't have.
But it was a sort of a soft way from all being financed by one person. Now, I suppose that all team finance themselves.
Well, that's the aim. There's probably two teams right now that are more than financing themselves, and we want all 12 that to be the case. Probably 6 of them are close to that, and 6 of them have got some distance to achieve that. But the foundations are there, and there's really encouraging signs with a lot of the teams announcing new partnerships, which you would have seen over the last few months.
Now there are 12 teams. Is there room for more?
Our plan is to expand by 2 more teams for next season, and we'll then split to a 7 versus 7 format. So within the 90-minute broadcast, we'll have 7 boats racing on one side of the draw. They'll finish racing. It'll be a short section for the free-to-air broadcasters to run their ads, and then we'll be straight into the next start with the other 7 boats from the other side of the draw, and then the top 4 teams, instead of 3 teams, will go through to race the podium race.
Right.
So that's where we're heading to in the future. And then the following year after we'll go to we'll sell 15 and 16, and then I think that's where we'll probably pause there, and just see how that looks. I think probably that 8-boat format on our race courses is pretty nice. 12 boats is almost too many, and the commentary team struggle to keep up with everything that's going on. So the 8-boat format, I think, might just be that sweet spot that works for us.
So these 2 groups will be equal. There's no such as an A or B group.
No, that'd be seeded. We've got to figure the rules out around that, but they would be seeded into those groups, probably based on their standings in the season championship. Should I say the Rolex SailGP championship, based on their standings. That's what they'll be seeded into, and.
You mentioned a figure of $15 million. Is that what it takes to enter a team into SailGP?
That's what it takes these days. Some of the teams got in basically for the cost of operation. So the cost of operating a team is about $8 million a year. But the cost to buy into the league now is $50 million minimum. So that's how much it's grown in 5 years.
Are you going to stick to the same boats?
Well, the boats are evolving all the time. So the answer is no. We've got new componentry coming in on stream all of the time. For example, we're about to commence building some new wing sail components. We're building new rudder elevators for the high speed and low speed ones. We'll do a next iteration of foils. We'll probably modify the actual platform or evolve the platform at some stage. But I'm quite keen to keep the look of SailGP similar to what it is. I mean, to use the analogy, they could have closed the wheels in on a Formula One car years ago and gone faster, but they haven't. They've kept the look of the product the same, the look of the brand the same, and I think we'll aim to do that. So that we can build a fan base around it. If you keep changing things every, too quickly, I think other forms of our sport have done that, sometimes to the detriment, and the fans actually don't really know what they're watching.
So we can expect to see 50-foot catamarans, for some time.
Yeah, but I mean, there's certainly the catamarans as you see today. Certainly they'll evolve. So I don't know what that will be. We definitely will change the hull forms at some point, and definitely the beams, the cross beams at some point, for sure. There's talk of changing the geometry of those, to change the performance. We're very focused on improving the light wind performance in particular. So it's one thing to go, I think the boats, frankly, are spectacular enough in strong winds. And if they went 5 knots faster, you possibly wouldn't even notice the difference. But in light winds, I think it's a big deal that we improve the performance a lot. So the new foils that we've got, for example, coming on stream in New York, the light wind foils, the boats will foil in about 1.5 knots less wind speed than what they currently do. And then the new rudder wings that are coming on stream, probably a bit after that, maybe hopefully might get them for Geneva. Then they'll help again, add to that again. And then we've, of course, longer term, we're developing a propulsion system that'll get the boat up onto the foils. And then from there, of course, the propulsion system won't be active, it'll be out of the water. So that's in the pipeline as well.
So that means you will foil now at what, 6 knots, 7 knots?
Maybe probably less than that with the new foils. Certainly with the new foils and new rudder wings, definitely less than that. So, and the new light air wings probably going to help that as well.
You're also expanding your number of events. So it's now all over the world, and it's going on more or less year round. Will your teams be able to do the America's Cup as well, or is it a fierce competition now between you and the America's Cup for the best sailors?
Look, first of all, I don't think we're in competition at all. I think that we're a long way from oversaturating the market in sailing. If you look at the sailing that's televised, and what I mean by televised live in a race sense, there's really only SailGP right now and the America's Cup when it's on. I think that's a long way. If you look at other sports, look at football, we're a long way from saturating, having too much content to watch in terms of sailing. So I think, as long as the properties are professionally televised and, shown to a high standard, I think overall it does the sport the world of good. As I said, markets the sport, gets more people into it. I think that's a good thing.
There's another concept called the foiling world, which is moth. It's a wasp. It's the 69 Italian boat, and are these the best recruiting boats for SailGP?
Oh, I think there's a number of pathways you can get to the top. I mean, one of the things that we aim to do with SailGP is have a more structured pathway. So again, the fact that we can sign 10-year partnerships means that you can plan a pathway. So for example, the Canadian team injured their flight controller in Auckland and couldn't race on day 2. Now that's totally unacceptable for a professional sport. That wouldn't happen in football, for example. Even if one of your star players got injured, they'd have a replacement ready and the game would still go on and they'd still have a chance of winning. So I think we've got a long way to go in the sport to really be fully professional. And one of the things that we are working quite hard over is structuring that pathway in a much more professional way, where young athletes can come in, they can train, they can trial, and be probably I suppose analysed, so that then teams could then evaluate whether they can come into their squad or not. Whereas right now it's a bit hit and miss. So some sailors do, as you say, a moth program, 49er program. They might even win an Olympic medal in the 49er class, and they still don't break into the professional ranks. It's so we need a much clearer and more defined pathway where sailors can really get in, try out for these professional teams, and eventually, be evaluated and selected.
You have a nationality rule which is sort of special, so that in the beginning, when your first season, you are allowed to have a few foreign crew members, and then as you go on, that is being reduced. In the end, you have to have.
Yeah, well, we've pretty much standardised it now that you only need 50% nationality.
Okay.
So obvious 6-person crew, 3 of them need to be nationals, and then it's adjusted as we drop crew off for lighter winds. We always felt at the beginning that we needed that nationality component to the teams because it's in the early days the fans might not know who the star athlete is, but they know what the nationality represents, so that they still follow it, like the Olympic Games. And in a lot of sports in the Olympic Games, you don't necessarily need to know the star athlete, but you follow it because you might be, rooting for your country. But so we had a nationality component for that reason, and I think it's still important to have a nationality component, but not if it keeps the top sailors off the boats from sailing. It seems senseless to me that you'd have a rule that just because you were born in a country with a certain passport, you can't then go racing in the top professional league in the sport. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So somebody from, I don't know, the British Virgin Islands, if they're good enough, they should be able to race in this league.
Absolutely. Which means that even if Norway does not succeed in putting up a team, we can still have a sailor on the.
If an athlete's good enough, and that's why I think we've got to have a much more structure around an evaluation program for these athletes. If they're good enough, they should get the chance to race, at the top level. And what a lot of people don't realize is these boats are incredibly complicated, and intentionally so. And it was interesting. I heard a conversation with I sort of heard a conversation between Tom Slingsby and 2 of our designers, Hal Youngren and Paul Beaker, about the new foils and what he thought about it. And it was an incredibly technical discussion. The Tom's understanding of how the boat works, how the forces work, and so forth was impressive. So any young athlete out there, okay, you're selling your wasp or your moth, but to get to this level, is going to take some real work, and real training. It's not a matter of just jumping on board, and we've seen, really good sailors like Diego Botín and that sort of thing. It takes time. Or even Pete Burling in his first season in SailGP struggled to get results.
Right. If we look at technology, you were mentioning that these sailors are very up to technology. They understand the technicality with the boats. They have to understand everything. There's a new system now that is Norwegian-based, Vantage, which I think you know a little bit about.
Sure.
What do you think of that?
I think it's essential. I think any sailor out there that's not looking to use and employ data in their program is really missing a huge element of their progression for lots of reasons. Just having it there's lots of reasons, but if we just start with a few, having it as a basis of a record to look back on. So because quite often we go through phases where we are sailing well, and then 3 months later things aren't going so well. And it's nice to actually have that data record to go back on and say, well, let's just compare the data between now and then and just see. Okay, we might have changed sails, we might have changed masts and so forth, but let's just look at the hard data and just see, what is there a performance difference, or have the others improved and it's making our performance look not so good. So that's the real basic side of it. But then when you get into analyzing the data, I think you can learn a lot about the performance of the boat, how to optimize the performance of the boat just by optimizing the your speed and angle, basically for the various conditions. And of course, you might be missing some information. You might be missing an accurate wind speed, but you can over time you can get reasonably good at estimating some of that. So I always think it's better to have that information available than just be shooting completely in the dark. So you definitely get insights from the data, even if you're missing one piece of information, you'll get valuable insights from the data from the performance perspective. But then tactically as well, you can go back and review, for example, well, also depending on how thorough your data is, um, where your losses are, and you start to, because we all have well, not me anymore because I don't race anymore, but when I was racing, I had thoughts on what my strengths and weaknesses were, but it wasn't backed up. Apart from when I went into America's Cup, it wasn't backed up by data. And you can mislead yourself. You can think that you're actually quite good at something, and in actual fact, when you look at the hard data, maybe it's not the case. Maybe it's an area that you still need to put some real work into, or it might be an area that you really need to focus on. So it can, if you use data well, it can really enhance your program. And I think that what Vantage is doing is a pretty it's a very usable format to get what I think is quite a good uh, take a big step forward in sort of using the data to improve your performance.
Which you can use for moth and you can use it for SailGP anytime.
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing, and I know that this has been a discussion. So I think there's very few programs in the world, and even, when I was racing in America's Cup, I'd say very few teams in America's Cup train to the fullest using the data and what I would describe as full teamwork to its fullest potential. So in other words, what I'm really saying is I think I would venture to say, and this might be a little controversial, most programs are way underutilizing their their available talent and available information. The simple example is you have two boats and you have two teams training for the Olympic Games, let's say, and one's faster than the other. Do you allow the sailors to swap boats? Do you swap equipment between those boats? And if you don't, you might think a certain mast is fast for certain reasons, but in 2 years' time, you might have concluded that actually you were totally wrong. You had the wrong result. How many times have you heard that? So I think this sharing of the data. Let's say that one of the things that in the Vantage program you can opt into share data with others. I think in time, I bet most people want to share data. I bet they do. Because if you're on the outside and everyone else is, because it's all at the speed of learning. If you're on the outside and everyone else is using the data, like in SailGP, we have the data totally in the open, so all teams can see each other's data. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone can sail like Tom Slingsby. Quite the opposite. But it means that it gives them something to aim for, right? And in actual fact, sailing like Tom Slingsby might not suit them in all cases, but at least they've got that basis to go forward. And I think you know you can achieve certain things in secrecy and you can get a fair way, but in my opinion, you'll get absolutely thrashed by a program that's run well, that totally utilizes all the resources available to it.
Right. Well, we are running out of time, but before we hang up, the question is this: do we ever have time to sail for yourself?
No, not really. I do a tiny little bit of cruising these days, but to be honest with you, I'm not that interested in racing anymore because I can't do it to the same level as I once could. So it's just not as much fun for me. But I love being involved in junior programs and promoting junior sailing, and I love, SailGP. I love promoting, trying to make this sport sustainable in a financial sense and in a business sense. I think that's fascinating, and I think I generally believe it's doing something good for the sport.
Hmm. Well, Russell Coutts, thank you very much for your 30 minutes of time for Seilmagasinets,
Welcome.
and
Welcome.
have a nice day.
Thank you.